First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great episode. We're going to be talking about what management needs to do to make sure that if the inmate makes an allegation, it's properly investigated and we're able to protect our staff from false allegations. That's the key for this dialogue. I want to make sure that the focus of this dialogue right now is to kind of give management some ideas, just in case inmates are making false allegations, what you can do to make sure that the allegations are investigated, but also that we save the reputation from our good, honest staff who is just doing their jobs. Obviously, we know inmates are going to make false allegations, because sometimes they just have motivations that could include getting the officer off the unit, maybe manipulating a move, either way, or maybe even just to have us run amok because they know that we have to act on each and every allegation. Me and Gary York, because Gary York's going to be the guest today, we're going to discuss some of the things that management can do to make sure that if there's a false allegation set against staff, that we are able to prove it. Hey, Gary, I think this is going to be a great topic. Gary, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience again?
Hello, everybody. I'm Gary York. I'm a retired Florida corrections officer, 28.8 years total between state prison and county jail. And I appreciate you having me on the show to talk about this topic, which is very important. We don't want any false allegations to go without every stone unturned, and we do not want anybody to get in trouble over a false allegation.
That's the key, guys. And I think, as Gary just said, even management wants to do what they can to protect officers from those false allegations, to protect staff from false allegations. So these are some tips that I feel can help management do that job. And ultimately, I think this will also help with staff morale. Because when staff sees that inmates are getting in trouble for making false allegations, it's going to carry a lot of weight with staff, and that's going to start giving the trust that's needed to really run an effective facility. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talk for you, brave men and women that work in corrections, so please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. When we come back, let's talk about false allegations against our staff. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, guys. So the topic is protecting our staff from false allegations. And guys, it's going to happen, especially when you have a facility that's constantly in the news for a negative reputation. And usually, unfortunately, it's probably maybe a few isolated incidences that are used to generalize that negative reputation. But either way, once the eyes go on that facility, staff is going to go through a lot of false allegations because the inmates are like, well, someone's listening. So they kind of just throw a lot of stuff out there in the hopes that they're going to get heard, but in hopes that we don't investigate it to its fullest, because they're going to throw out these false allegations just to continue the bad reputation and hopefully makes them look more credible. That's the scary thing. So what we have to do is we have to remind the public that there are good staff that work behind the wall and that the allegations are not going to go without having a proper investigation. I mean, that's the key, guys. I mean, these inmates may decide that we're going to go ahead and just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall in the hopes that it sticks, because right now the public tends to believe the inmates more than they believe staff. But in this case here, the objective here is to show the public that these allegations have been investigated, they're found to be unfounded, and the inmate should be disciplined for making the false allegation. When staff realizes that the inmate to being disciplined for the false allegations, it can actually encourage staff to continue doing their job, because most of the time, the false allegations that are coming their way are probably on officers that are doing their job, officers that have a presence, and the inmates are trying to do what they can to minimize that officer at being effective. So real quick, Gary, what are some of the reasons in your mind why inmates would do a false allegation?
Well, we've had a lot of false allegations by inmates. Obviously, you know, some people are saying right now, yeah, for sure, we know that's true. Every now and then, one might be true. But I'm going to tell you what, lots of times, the majority of the times, the inmates are making allegations against an officer who's doing their job, making them follow the rules, and the officer has disciplined the inmate or made the inmates do what they're supposed to do. So now they've got to get rid of that officer because they can't play their inmate game. So they're going to make false allegations. When a false allegation is made against an officer, we do have to investigate it. I mean, we either investigate it administratively and allow the institution to handle it, or sometimes it gets sent higher up depending on the allegation. And one thing we have to do is not look at the officer and say, what did you do to provoke this? What, you know, that would be very poor management if you walked over to an officer who had an allegation against him by an inmate and started asking questions that seemed to be almost accusing the officer. That's poor management. Now, number one, we don't want anybody losing their job over a false inmate allegation. We have to do a fair and impartial investigation. And I would like to say this, you should not, and if you are, you need to get an attorney. You should not ever lose your job with an inmate saying you did something and that's all they have. There has to be tangible evidence, physical evidence, written evidence, or something to substantiate what this inmate is saying. So I'm going to shoot it back to you, Anthony, and we'll bounce some things back and forth. But number one, you have to make darn sure that you do not accuse an officer ahead of time and you do a fair and impartial investigation.
Yeah, I love what you said about the tangible evidence, because sometimes when management puts tools in place to gather the tangible evidence, sometimes frontline staff may see that that's an attack on them. And to me, that really goes with the culture of that facility. Do we trust management? Because some of the tools that we have to employ could be interpreted subjectively, depending on how you view management. So if you go to a facility where management and frontline are working together as one, these tools that we're going to mention today will be well received. But if you go to a facility where management and frontline are divided, the tools will not be well received. Same tools, just an interpretation of how these tools are going to be employed based on whatever that history is. So I want you to know something, guys. Just as much as, you know, we want to prove an inmate wrong, obviously, if they made a false allegation, you got to realize something. These inmates know that they can be proven wrong. So they try to make allegations that are very hard for the investigative authority to prove that they lied. So the problem is when they do these investigations on these staff members, even though the allegation is probably false, if the investigative authority can't lean on anything tangible, the investigation winds up being unsubstantiated, which means that we don't have any evidence that can go either way. So in my opinion, as management, that doesn't really do a lot for me. It doesn't, because that means the person could have done it or they couldn't have done it. I really can't lean on that. So for liability's sake, for me as management, I'm going to go to the investigative authority. I'm going to say, do me a favor, write down exactly what you need so we could start bringing some validity to your investigations, whether they're substantiated or whether they are unfounded. I can't deal with the unsubstantiated because, again, it doesn't give me enough evidence to go ahead and say this person can go back to this post or this person can't go back to their post. It's kind of, you know, up in the air. And I think any allegation that's made about an officer doing their job needs to have a definitive outcome. Either the person did it, which we hope they didn't, or we can prove that the person didn't do it. I would like to think that the sworn officer, when there is, you know, something that's harder to prove, something that, maybe could just be something that you said or something that the inmate said you said. I'm sorry. Being that you're a sworn officer, you do have a heightened level of credibility unless for some reason you have destroyed that. For some reason. Hopefully that's not the case, because if you have, then you shouldn't be in this profession. But as a sworn officer, your word should have a higher level of authority over an inmate unless there's a reason why it doesn't. Unless there's a reason why management and the investigative authority question your level of credibility. But let's start with that first. Sometimes, Gary, a lot of the inmates will say an officer said this when we know they didn't, whether it's a threat or something sexual. And you can't prove that the officer didn't say it, unfortunately. But shouldn't the officer's word, unless there's a reason not to trust it, hold some level of credibility?
Well, absolutely. The officer's word should hold a lot of credibility in this type of allegation. Now, we have here what we call substantiated, unsubstantiated, and unfounded. So now you're an officer that's been doing your job, everything you're supposed to do, and now you've got 3 or 4 of these false allegations on you. But as you said, it can't be proven it didn't happen. It can't be proven that it did happen or did not happen. So now you've got these unsubstantiated cases on your record, and you go up for promotion. Now you're in management saying, well, I've got this guy or girl or man or woman that has 4 unsubstantiated cases. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because that still tells you nothing. Did they do it or didn't they do it? Really, that unsubstantiated should go out the door, and investigators should be told, you're either going to find out it happened and we substantiate it, or you're going to find nothing and it didn't happen and we're going to go unfounded. I'd rather see a record with 4 unfounded cases, meaning cleared or, and free and clear of the case. And a lot of officers have complained about that over the years. I've had officers tell me, I haven't done anything wrong, and I got these 3 investigations from these darn inmates, and it says unsubstantiated, so I didn't get promoted. The other guy did because he had no investigations, or the other woman did. It is a deal breaker in many cases for officers that haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah, I agree, because the unfounded is something management can lean on. Yeah, you may have had 4 cases. That's even we even get to see the unfounded, because technically the unfounded should not even be on the person's record. It's unfounded. Right. The unsubstantiated ones are a little tougher, because at any time, it's just not enough evidence to prove it happened or it didn't happen. But as management, when you go to hire somebody, I agree with you 100%. If there was an investigation, and let's say I'm made known of it somehow, however I find out, unfounded, that's easy for me now to make a decision to bring the person in, because, all right, it's unfounded. And this is the evidence that shows it was unfounded, because I'm able to lean on that evidence and okay, I'll take this guy, I'll take this because the case is unfounded. But the concern here sometimes is that when we go to implement measures that can help prove, the false allegations to be false, sometimes the unions or the front line don't see it as the right tools. They see that those tools are going to be used for the wrong reasons. And guys, again, this really deals with the trust you have for management. Because one of the things that you guys need when it comes to protecting yourself from false allegation, and guys, it helps, even though a lot of people are not for it, body cams. Body cams 100% have audio, or they should have audio. They got a visual, and when an inmate goes to make a false allegation, the investigative unit can go right to the body cams and make a decision, and then go back to management and say, hey, listen, this is what the inmate said. And it's going to even stop even some PREA protocols from happening. Because you could have, let's say a PREA case where inmate says, well, the officer told me to do this. Okay, don't run the PREA just yet. Hold on. Let's check the video footage, the sound. I don't hear the officer saying this at all. We checked everything. Well, now here's what we're going to do. There's no need for the PREA protocol, but we're also going to charge the inmate. Because let's be honest, guys, PREAs are not easy. They get us running. And the thing is, the last thing we want to do is be chasing after false allegations when there's real ones to be going after. You know, these inmates that come up with these false allegations, whatever their motivation is, while we're running around trying to handle this, we have probably real allegations that we're probably not able to get to because they got us running amok on the false. But again, you can go right to the video, and then you can present that this was unfounded based on this evidence. Then you can give it back to management, who's going to say, not a problem. I have no problem putting this officer back on their post. Now, if you don't have, like I said, one piece of evidence, and, you know, investigation comes through and the investigation is unsubstantiated, it goes back to management, management could have universal precaution with that. Like, you know what? I don't have proof that they did it, but you're not giving me anything that says they didn't do it. So if I put this person back onto a post and something happens, could I be held liable? You know, so what's your thoughts on the body cams, and how much does that help the agency protect staff from false allegations?
Well, the body cam would be great. And I know some agencies are going to it and many agencies are not. That could solve your problem very quickly. Now, what I like about the body cam on another version from what you described is the inmate makes a false allegation. We go to the body cam, we see it didn't happen. As an investigator, we can do unfounded and then tell the warden or the assistant warden that, hey, or the colonel or whoever, we need to write this inmate up for disciplinary now because he lied or she lied. And we need to back up our staff by giving some discipline onto the inmates who made the false allegation, plus not let the inmate get away with it. Now, if the allegation is very, very, very serious, we could even throw that at the state attorney and say, come on, this inmate alleged sexual abuse. We can't have these false allegations going on with our officers. You know, we need to do something. Now, will they prosecute or not? I don't know, probably on a case-by-case basis. And then on the lighter allegations, we can still use disciplinary measures at the institution level. So I think it would be great to prove the inmates wrong.
I love that. Let's say you get an officer that's doing what they're supposed to do, and, you know, they're catching on to something, and the inmates find out that this officer is this close to catching something. They sometimes don't make that false allegation, you know, because they know that we have to immediately react and remove that officer in some case. Let's say it's a pre-allegation, you know, for safety and security reasons. But I would like to think that management also knows that a game like that could be played. So even when you move the officer, while that investigation takes place, you can still continue with momentum and tell the other officers this is what we're doing, and kind of, you know, keep them on the track so the inmates know that, okay, by moving one officer, they must be all communicating, because that didn't stop the momentum of them finding what they have to find. But the other thing is, I like what Gary said. The discipline is important for two reasons, guys. One thing is the employee morale. When you're going into a facility, even if it's like to clean the reputation, they got to know that, you know, the good staff want to know that, you know, you have their back against those false allegations, because the inmates are going to be throwing them out like crazy. So it's great for them to see that the false allegations are not being tolerated, because you still have to maintain the employee morale and trust of those that are doing their job. So it's great to see that you're zero tolerance. Now, some people may say, well, if you write up inmates for making false allegations, it's going to discourage other inmates from reporting allegations that could be truthful. I'm going to disagree with that. And I'm sure Gary would too. The reason why is, once you're able to have the tools to prove that these allegations are false, that should not be in any way close to discouraging someone from making an honest allegation. You know, I mean, that's been the concern for a while, especially when it comes to PREA. When you have the results coming back unsubstantiated, you can't discipline the inmate. The officer, unfortunately, because of that universal precaution, there could be many routes, unfortunately, that can happen to that officer because of the universal precaution. That's why you got to have that end result. But the inmate, you can't discipline because it's neither here nor there. Can't prove it or not. But because of the officer and their position of authority, when you have that unsubstantiated case, and God forbid there's something wrong with that officer, you do have a rogue officer, and you put them back with inmate contact and they do something that can be proven, those unsubstantiated cases are going to come to surface. You know, you were told 3, 4, 5 times about this person. Now, as management, if it was unfounded, I easily have a defense. Wait a second, guys. all those cases were unfounded. The investigative authority checked it out, found some evidence. That's what motivated me to put the officer back. So you can't use that against me. But the 4 that are on some whatever's, those can, because there's not enough evidence to say here nor there. But the biggest thing that we've had lately was the fact that they think that if you discipline an inmate for making a false allegation, it will discourage inmates from making an honest allegation. I love your thoughts on that, Gary. Do you think that's, that's true? Or do you think that if you can prove that these allegations are false, that should not have an effect on the inmates who do have an honest allegation?
No, from my experience, that is not going to stop other inmates from making a truthful allegation, and it's not going to stop them from making more false allegations. But we have to deal with each inmate case by case. Now, here in Florida, when I worked, we always had to do a briefing with the warden. I'm going in here to investigate this. And on the way out, when the investigation was done, I'd sit with the warden and say, this is what we found, and I'm going to write it up, and I'm going to send it to Tallahassee. And the warden would say, I'm glad you proved that inmate wrong. Now I'm going to do what I need to do and, get somebody to write him a disciplinary report. And then there were some wardens that would not follow up and give the inmate a disciplinary report. It depends on who your warden is. But let me tell you, I think it's very important that when we prove the inmate lied, that they get disciplinary action. And no, it will not stop them from making allegations either way.
Right. And I also think sometimes the tighter the security measures that we put in place also help. Like, inmates observe routines. So we talked about in a show recently where, let's say you have an officer that decides to take their break in a housing unit and kind of break with the other officer, which they shouldn't do, guys. Those officers really should be watching the unit. You shouldn't break into another housing unit. But let's say this becomes a regular thing. Well, now the inmate kind of knows, okay, he comes into the unit every day, so I could easily make a false allegation on him or her because they're going to be here every day. So the good thing is that when you put the security measures in place, like let's say you can't break in other units, which you shouldn't do. You should break in a designated break area. If you have to go to another housing unit, you need the permission of your supervisor. The officer that's in that housing unit must write you in. All these measures that make it harder for you to kind of venture in one unit or the other. Some people may look at that like, well, Gangi, that's messes with an officer's freedom. They should be allowed to do these things. Yeah, I can go either way with that. But I will say this. If it's complicated for you to get from point A to point B, it's also complicated for the inmate to make the false allegation. Because there's so many channels now that the inmate has to go through. And I really don't think that's an inconvenience for staff. I would like to think that we're trying to protect staff because, again, if I'm management, I want to be able to fall back on something that says there's no way that officer did what you said. So how would I do that? Not a problem. Besides, hopefully there's cameras in the unit, but let's just say they're not, hypothetically. Well, I can tell you right now, because the officer said they weren't there. The person's not in the logbook. The supervisor on shift also said that, the person wasn't there, nor did the person ask for them to go there, because the logbook is something we all lean on, by the way. And it provides an extra step for the inmate to try to get around. And in my opinion, Gary, even though it may seem that we're putting a little bit of a wall with staff, I disagree with that. They understand why that wall is being built. Would you agree?
Well, let me tell you, I worked at the state and the jail. When I went to the jail from the prison, I would see people take their lunch hour and go down to another dorm and hang out with the officer down there for their lunch hour, or a break and go down and hang out with the other officer. And I was watching the sergeant on shift, 2 of them, as a matter of fact, on 2 different shifts. And I was pretty impressed because they would look at the officer. They would come in the dorm to do a check. What are you doing in this dorm? I'm just sitting here chatting with, well, you know what? This is your lunch hour. You need to get your mind out of the dorm for a while anyway. It's good to do that. Get out, do something different while you have a chance. And you don't need to be down in this dorm. And people would, some people would understand. Some people would be like, what is wrong with him or her? But you know what? They're doing it to help you for that same reason. You have a dorm, you're working. This is your break. Take your break. No need to come down here and maybe get involved in a mess or say something on your break that gets you involved in a false allegation with an inmate. You know, take your breaks, get away. It's good for your mind anyway to take a break. And Anthony, I agree. I've seen the supervisors use that method. You don't need to be hanging out in this other dorm. Take your break and then go back to your dorm.
I agree with that because, again, even though some frontline may not see it as we do, I think from the higher level, the reason why we see it is because we're able to defend against that false allegation, you know, by putting things in play that, it may limit your freedom to some extent, but it also makes it harder for the inmate to make the false allegation. I mean, that's the key. I mean, the key is that, you know, you want to make sure that you have measures in play that stop the inmate from just pulling out any allegation and then having that allegation come back as unsubstantiated. You know, we're looking for unfounded or, sad to say, substantiated, at least from a management level. So anything that helps us do that, and sometimes frontline may think as an inconvenience to them, but think about in the long run, guys, how much weight that will help. Because in the end, you could have these lawyers or something like that are going to look to make a lawsuit, look to do whatever it is, and now you have the investigative authority saying, nope, this was unfounded. This was unfounded, as opposed to it being unsubstantiated, because the lawyers know the difference. The lawyers know the difference between unfounded, unsubstantiated, and substantiated. When they see results that are coming back unsubstantiated, they're going to have a field day with that. And most likely, if they get an inspector or internal affairs agent that's just not really good at what they do, that lawyer is going to be able to twist that inspector. Because again, the inspector themselves, there's no evidence. So she just gave up unsubstantiated. And then they're going to come after management. You know, because management is like, well, that's what the investigators gave me. Yeah, but it doesn't look like there was any evidence. You know, or they're you know, or not enough to go either way. So what made you think that this person would be good to put back on their post? So again, some of the measures that we take are literally meant to protect you and not hurt you. But again, that really depends on how you view management. So we mentioned some limitations we may put on staff in regards to touring certain areas. We also talked about cameras. But one last thing too is the supervisors. Now, guys, there's more to cover here, but this is just a little bit that we can go over in a certain amount of time. There should be some trust in the supervisors when they do their rounds, that if there are any incidents that the inmates, you know, would tell them. Because sometimes what happens here, guys, is you have supervisors that will interview inmates, and then, you know, they're doing their job. They wrote everything the inmate said, and then later on the inmate says, you know, oh, well, this happened. Well, why didn't you mention that to the supervisor when they interview, 2 hours ago? Well, I forgot. All right. But then you can lean on the supervisor who said, well, I interviewed that inmate. He never said that he had a concern. And now all of a sudden, when he's getting written up, he has that concern with the officer. I just spoke to the inmate 2 hours ago. He never had that concern, because a lot of the times when the inmates make false allegations, another reason is because it's in retaliation to you writing them up. You go to write them up. Now it's a battle of credibility. Who's smarter? So I'm going to go ahead and say something first before they do. So as I said, a supervisor that does a tour and has that interaction with that inmate, and there's no issues there, and all of a sudden the inmate gets charged, and 2 hours later there is, you can go back and the supervisor say, well, I interviewed the first time around, you didn't have an issue. Now all of a sudden you do. I think that's related to the fact that the officer wrote you a charge, and now you're trying to retaliate or mess with their credibility. What's your thoughts on that, Gary? I know that happens a lot.
Well, as an investigator, I would be going in, if I'm assigned a case and I have to investigate it to the fullest, that supervisor that you just mentioned is going to write me a sworn affidavit. And that supervisor is going to tell me that the inmate changed his or her story after they found out that they're being disciplined. That affidavit goes in my file. That's very credible affidavit that is backing up the officer. Supervisor backing up the officer's word. Now, unless I find something along the way that changes it, this case is unfounded. I've interviewed. Now I'm not going to run to the officer first and accuse him of anything, him or her. I'm going to be interviewing the inmate. I'm going to be checking on their history, checking on anything they told me to see if there's any inkling of anything being true. When all that's said and done and I have nothing, then I'm going to interview the supervisor you just spoke of, get his affidavit. Then I'm going to go to the officer and tell him, hey, you know, there's an allegation made against you. You have the right to know who it is. It's inmate so-and-so. I'm going to just ask you some questions and allow the officer to give their side of the story. And that case is pretty much done and over. So that scenario you just gave with that supervisor is very important.
I like what you said about the false allegation too, because if there's no reason to not trust that supervisor, then the thing here at this point here is that supervisor's statement should hold weight. He's a supervisor. So after the supervisor says, yeah, this inmate said it after the fact, it wasn't part of something they told me originally when I did my original tours. And then when it gets investigated, it comes back unsubstantiated. Why? The supervisor is the next level up. There's no reason that their credibility should be shot in this case. They're not directly involved with the officer. It just happened to be the officer, you know, the officer wrote a charge, technically something between the inmate and the officer, but the officers is correct in doing so. So then when you lean to the supervisor being, in my mind, a witness, saying, you know what, I spoke to you prior, you didn't say it. Now when I come back 2 hours later, now all of a sudden you have an issue, but you know, you also just got charged. So in my mind here, the officer, the sergeant or the supervisor writes that statement down. That to me, as long as there's no reason to discredit that supervisor, could be enough to say, you know what, this allegation is false, you know, based on my interview with the supervisor who said when he spoke to the inmate did state they had no concerns. A lot of times, again, it's going to come back unsubstantiated, but now to me, that discredits the supervisor now. You know, well, we didn't say he didn't, we didn't say he did say it. Yeah, but you have a supervisor telling you specifically that, you know, he walked to the inmate didn't have any concerns, and now all of a sudden, you know, the inmate has these concerns, and you can clearly see that there's a relationship. Obviously, there's a lot of scenarios that could play out like that, but I think in our business, a lot of the cases that are unsubstantiated, as long as there's reasons or no reasons to not trust what's coming your way, the statements from the staff that's not, you know, that are sworn officers that, you know, have high levels of credibility should count for something that automatically will say, you know what, we're not going to lean on unsubstantiated. We're going to go ahead and lean on unfounded for this inmate, because we have multiple staff who said that this is what the inmate said, and that staff never said that. And by the way, I know we keep on going back and forth with verbal, but that's usually the hardest stuff to prove or disprove. You know, because, you know, it is. And a lot of verbal now could deal with sexual harassment, which can fall into PREA. So again, you got these custody staff who are good officers defined by integrity, but their statement only leads to an unsubstantiated. You know, unless there's reason for it to be something else, we should be able to lean on those statements a bit more. Because in the end, in my mind here, is when the inmate says this, and you got multiple staff that said that this didn't happen. And again, it's good staff, no reason to question who they are. And the inspectors know. The inspectors know which staff is good. They do, you know, because they're the ones that are getting the complaints. Management knows. So when you have staff that are good at what they do, and there's no reason to discredit them, then as management, I would say, you know what, how many staff witnessed that? 5 or 6? And they said he didn't say it? Good. And all right, you know what, let's go for the unfounded. Can we push that? And then you yourself can lean on the statements from the staff that I think that if they were ever challenged, their history would be able to show that they were credible. Correct?
Correct. And, you know, what you said about knowing, yeah, you're right. Our regional office, we knew who got the most allegations against them, and we knew who had an iffy history. But I'll tell you what, it didn't matter, because our supervisor always said, and I think a good inspector supervisor is going to say, we don't care who we're investigating. We're going to be fair and impartial. And if it's not there, it's not there. And that's the only way to do it, folks. You know, do not go out there and try to make something that is not there and just let the chips fall where they may. And if you do that as an investigator on my side, then the officers who are not doing anything wrong should come out on top on every investigation. Now, if they're doing something wrong, you know, things are going to turn up. But if there's nothing turning up, then it's done. It's over. Move on to the next case.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, obviously, if we had the body cams, it wouldn't even get to this point. But because a lot of facilities don't, well, most facilities don't, only some are starting to do it now. We have supervisors that, again, if they're there or you have other officers who have good credibility, if they write a statement, I think by saying that what they wrote only leads the investigator to say it's unsubstantiated. Well, you also said that what they wrote is not enough proof that the inmate lied. You know, so why are they in that position? You know, I mean, if you're questioning their credibility, but yet you put them in a position of trust, then why are they running a housing unit? You know, so if their word doesn't carry any weight, why are they given that trusted position of authority? You know, the end result has either got to be if there's the unfounded or the substantiated. Again, there are sometimes, I'm not saying, of course, there's sometimes where stuff can be unsubstantiated. But I'm giving out examples where, for some reason, we're so afraid to lean on the word of credible staff, but yet we give them the position of authority to go ahead and run units and do a job that, you know, hopefully the public can get some level of trust for. But I think this was a great dialogue. I think we covered some parts. Obviously, opens up to other discussions. But Gary, you like to say anything in closing?
I just like to say, you know, look at it like the scales of justice. Here's the correctional officers. You know, they are up here, and the inmates are down here. If we don't find anything that can prove anything, we're always should and have to go with the word of the officers, because they hold a much more of a higher standard in society, and they've taken the oath, and that's who we're going to go with. And thank you for your service, and stay clear and stay safe of any bad situations, folks, as best you can. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that right on point, Gary. Guys, we are in positions of trust. And the one thing we want to do is make sure that you do whatever you can to protect that integrity, protect that trust at all costs. Because again, you want the inspectors, you want management to be able to lean on you to get those unfounded results. You know, you want them to be able to say, well, who wrote that? Gangi? Yeah, you know, Gangi's credible. You know, who wrote that? Gary? Yeah, Gary's credible. You know, and these are cases that if something ever goes to that highest level, they're going to have no problem taking it there because of who you are, your credibility. You know, but as I said, if you have investigations that are, you know, you get all these officers to put down as witnesses and they write their statements and you're still coming out with unsubstantiated, to me, it really makes me question the officers who are giving that statement, you know. But again, we trust them, right? They're put in these high positions. So why are we not, you know, leaning on that trust when it comes to the results of an investigation? You know, unless there's conflict. But in my scenarios, I presented no conflict. Good officers, good supervisors, high integrity. They report something. Why can we not lean? If it's a false allegation, why can we not lean towards the unfounded with those statements in place? A good dialogue. As always, guys, the show is here. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.